Welcome to Access Asia, I'm Yuka Royer. Rising geopolitical tensions have brought the threat of nuclear war to the forefront of many minds. In this edition, we'll take a look at the build-up of nuclear arsenals in Asia and ask a survivor of the Nagasaki atomic bomb about the perils of war. Russia continues its aggression of Ukraine. Israel and the United States engaged in missile exchanges with Iran. India and Pakistan also recently came dangerously close to a war. All these countries are nuclear armed or suspected of seeking atomic weapons. Close to 1,000 nuclear warheads are estimated to be on Asian soil. Experts warn that escalating geopolitical tensions may have hardened North Korea's resolve to rely on the nuclear option to safeguard the regime. Antonia Carrigan reports.
Of the world's 9 nuclear powers, 4 are in Asia at close quarters. China is the largest with 600 warheads. India and Pakistan's arsenals are smaller, while shrouded in mystery is North Korea, thought to have amassed around 50 warheads in an undeclared program. Decades of diplomacy have sought unsuccessfully to talk Pyongyang down from its nuclear ambitions, a task which may now be harder than ever.
Now, having struck Iran while the US and Iran were engaged in negotiations, that's going to drive concern that any talks might be a pretext and that the US isn't actually serious about diplomacy and maybe buying time to build up military options against an adversarial state.
And North Korea's frequent shows of military strength have been enough to put their neighbours to the south on edge. A poll last February showed that more than 70% of South Koreans supported the idea of their country too becoming a nuclear power. Furthermore, last year the Japanese Prime Minister mooted the idea of storing US nuclear missiles in the country as part of what he called an Asian NATO. But the idea gained little ground in a country ravaged by 2 atomic bombs 80 years ago, which has since adopted a policy of pacifism, with no army, only a self-defense force. Meanwhile, a recent eruption of border tensions in the Kashmir region resurrected the spectre of nuclear war. The crisis was averted, but while India has a no-first-use policy, Pakistan does not.
Nuclear weapons have been used in war twice in human history. In August 1945, over 2 Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 210,000 people are estimated to have died by the end of that year, either directly from the blast or from subsequent injuries and radiation sickness. Earlier, I spoke with Seiichiro Mise, who survives the bombing in Nagasaki at the age of 10.
I was familiar with the sound of the Americans' B-29 bomber, so I was playing at home, imitating that sound on my sister's organ. When I finished playing and was about to stand up, there was a flash of light. Moments later, a huge blast ripped through our house. When I saw the flash at first, I had no idea what had dropped to us. A little while later, I asked my grandmother, who was living with us, "Grandma, what was that flash?" And she said that the sun had come falling down. We were that ignorant. A few days later, I went to check out our school with my friends. What we saw there was beyond our imagination. People covered in blood. We couldn't even tell whether they were men or women, were being brought in, pleading for water. 1,290 people were brought to our school, and 260 of them died in the assembly hall. They were saying, "Please kill us, because they were in so much pain." It was sweltering hot in the hall, and filled with the smell of open wounds rotting in the heat, and the noise of people suffering and wailing. It was hell on earth.
うめき声とでね、まさに体育館の中はもう地獄だ。だから僕たちのその学校のグラウンドはもう
The grounds of our school had become a crematorium, or worse still, a processing center for dead bodies. Throughout the month of August, people whose names and addresses are still not known, 80 years later, were dumped and burnt en masse.
知らない人に片っ端からもう片付けられてしまった。これが戦争だったわけですね。
The bombing of Nagasaki came 3 days after the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 6 days later, on the 15th of August, Mise heard about a radio broadcast, Japan's emperor announcing that the country had surrendered.
日本は戦争に負けた。
My grandmother told me that Japan lost the war, suffered a defeat that was never supposed to happen, and asked me how I felt. I said I was glad that we'd lost the war. I was really happy that it was over. My grandmother told me off for saying such a thing, but after 4 years of war, I was really fed up. People today probably wouldn't understand that feeling. But last year, when I was watching TV, there was a report about the Palestinians in Gaza. It showed a boy, probably 11 or 12, saying he wanted the war to end as soon as possible. That he wanted to go back to school with his friends and play with them. And that he wanted to be able to sleep at night. All those feelings were exactly the same as what I experienced 80 years ago. I could really relate to how those children were feeling in Gaza.
While the devastation in Gaza continued, tensions in the Middle East recently spread wider, with the United States entering the fray. After a ceasefire was reached between Israel and Iran, US President Donald Trump compared the US missile attack on Iranian nuclear facilities to the atomic bombing of Japan, saying they were essentially the same things in that they served to end the war.
They ended the war. It ended the war. Somebody said in a certain way, that it was so devastating, actually. If you look at Hiroshima, if you look at Nagasaki, that ended a war too. This ended a war in a different way, but it was so devastating.
Here's what Mr. Mise had to say about this comment.
Mr. Trump says powerful weapons were used to end the war. But I had relatives, cousins, who lived near the epicenter. They died in that atomic blast. We went to pick up their bones, but they had all turned to coal. To this day, I've never forgotten that scene and feel strong hatred towards nuclear weapons. We've been trying for so long to tell the world just how dangerous nuclear weapons are and how important it is to eliminate them. Seeing a US president say such a thing is completely unacceptable for me.
The United Nations pursues the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons, but Japan, the only country that experienced nuclear bombs in war, has not signed up to a treaty banning atomic weapons.
Every year, people come to the commemoration ceremony in Nagasaki, the atomic bomb, on the 9th of August. And afterwards, many hibakusha plead with ministers and officials who attend the ceremony to do more to eliminate nuclear weapons. Japanese politicians listen and say they'll make an effort, but they never actually take action. It's really frustrating. How much longer do we have to wait for Japan to join the UN meetings on the nuclear ban treaty? Even as observers, I strongly feel that Japan should participate as the only country that suffered atomic weapons in war and take a stand.
80 years on, the hibakusha, as the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings are known, continue to try and get their message of peace across, regularly speaking to school children about their experience.
There are no winners or losers in war, only sadness. When I speak about my experience in public, I always end by saying that I'm giving each of the people in attendance a seed of peace. If they take care of those seeds, they will definitely sprout. I hope they spread them all over the world and make them flower into flowers of peace. I'm counting on them to carry the baton forward.
Mr. Mise says that he will mark 80 years since the atomic bombing of Nagasaki on the 9th of August by visiting the graves of the 8 relatives he lost that day, as he has done every year. He says he will pour water on their tombs, thinking of the scorching heat they suffered. That's all for this edition of Access Asia, but do stay tuned if you can for our continuous coverage of world events here on France 24.